welcome to a special edition of the ATACS podcast. This is Adults Talk About Cool Stuff. It is September 1st, 2018, and this is going to be a Banner Saga spoiler cast. That's the entire trilogy. Banner Sagas 1, 2, and 3. They're out. They're done. We've played them. We're going to spoil all of them. This is your warning up front. It's no holds barred from here. I am your host, Flex, from Raleigh, North Carolina, joined by Ryan from New York. How's it going, Ryan?
It's good. It's not as depressing as, the end of the world.
I would hope not.
It's just Labor Day weekend.
Isn't it, though?
Nate from Clayton, North Carolina, how depressing is our world?
Maybe we should change the theme of this podcast.
I don't know. The Banner Saga definitely has its weighty moments.
Oh, boy.
This is a great intro.
Well, this took a turn.
I gotta go to sleep.
Forever. It's time to hibernate.
You and now, right? Will be like right by each other.
Yes. So this is a spoiler cast about we figured the Banner Saga 3 came out, a month or two ago?
Mm-hmm.
We've all played, I think all of us basically played all three as they came out. So the first one came out in 2014, second one 2016, and the third one now in 2018, so 2 years between each. And we've played them all along the way, kept up with the trilogy, and figured now is the time to look back and discuss whatever we want to discuss about all three games. And the Banner Saga trilogy is interesting because it's called Banner Saga 1, 2, and 3, but more than most games that are numbered 1, 2, and 3, tell me if you guys disagree, but I feel like this game really is just one game.
Yeah.
That's broken up into three parts. Because the art style, everything about its production looks the exact same. The story beats pick up, Banner Saga 2 picks up exactly right when Banner Saga 1 leaves off. So if you played them back to back, there would not be a noticeable break.
Yeah.
Even
other trilogies that are a one continuous story, like a Mass Effect, there are big game engine differences between the games. Yeah,
there are game engine differences. There are big story breaks there, and they even do mechanical resets. When you play Mass Effect 1, you level up and put points into your character, but when you start Mass Effect 2, you're knocked back down to 0 again.
Yep.
And you have to, and it's a whole different level up system and all that stuff. And Banner Saga carries over all of your character's attributes, whatever items you had, your experience, and stay at the same level, and it just keeps going.
Mm-hmm. It even just continues the chapter numbers straight through too, so they don't reset anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I definitely think that's. I definitely think that's a reasonably accurate description. Although I'm a bit hesitant because I've been burned. I played the first Dot Hack trilogy, or I don't remember if there were 3 or 4 of those games, and that particular franchise got a bit stale, after the second game. So I don't think the Banner Saga. I think it had, I guess, at least a strong enough story.
And
it is interesting the way this game has played out, because it's. I thought the turn-based combat was kind of interesting and fun, but I don't think the pure gameplay was necessarily its strength. It was more the art and the story and the character dialogue.
So here's a leading question, and then we're going to get into kind of giving the high level overview and thoughts of each of the three parts. Do you both think you enjoyed having the 2-year gap in between each part, or do you think, because I could totally see an alternate history where this came out as a single $60 game that's 30, 40 hours long, or however it would be if you put all three parts together. If it all just came out at once and was one big game, do you think you would have liked that any more or less, or about the same, or Any idea on that?
I think for me personally, I liked having it. I think 2 years, like it might have been a little bit preferable for them to be a little closer together. But with the length of these games, I think if it was one thing, I would have gotten really bogged down going through the whole thing in one stretch.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like if you added up the playtime for all of them, I don't know what that number is, but it's probably longer than I would want to play it all at once. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would guess my playtime for each was probably in like close to 15-ish hours. So altogether, you're probably looking 40 hours, give or take, depending on how quickly you play.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bit speculative. I mean, I have definitely had episodic games where I've been like, man, this episodic's, waiting 6+ months for a game is kind of a bummer. But these, obviously this is speculative. But for the Banner Saga in particular, yeah, because of the length of the games and because of the, they bookend the story pretty well, and it is a fairly like heavy game at times. Like, and you reach those, those end sections, and it's like, okay, well, I've done the thing. It's a bit of a relief. Let's go take a break. I mean, that break doesn't necessarily have to be 2 years, but maybe it's good to have a little space between each game.
You can only take so much depressing at once.
Yeah, like I mean, they really are like kind of breathless, oppressive games that like don't really give you moments of peace and quiet ever, especially as you get further into the series.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did this for all three of them. Even when I was playing them, I could never really do more than 1 or 2 hours at a time. Like it would be like at most 2 or 3 battles worth in a sitting, and I mean, and most sittings were shorter than that. It was just like, all right, I'm going to play for like 1 or 2 battles worth, make a couple of impossible decisions. And then go do something happier for a little bit.
Go play Doom.
Yes, the happiest game.
Yep.
Take out all my sadness and frustration on demons. Yeah, I think I kind of agree with that. I think I might have preferred a little less time in between, because by the time 2 years happens, I forget what happened.
Yeah.
In the previous version, but I think I agree that I would have gotten, if I was to play through all 3 without a break, I think I would have gotten bogged down.
Yeah.
But I liked having all 3 because I think all 3 forms a really good story, and I like that we got this full story.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to kick this off by like fairly high level going through each of the 3 parts and kind of the big story high points, and I guess how we felt about it at the time, because we all played each of these at release. And you two are going to have to help me out with all this.
Yeah.
I think my memory is spotty at best. You two probably remember at least as much as I do. So the first game, you start out playing as, I guess you're really from the point of view of Rook, and who's, I don't know, some ranger hunter type dude. And so I forget exactly what sets things into motion, but like, I mean, this is an end of the world type story, and these creatures called the Dredge start attacking, and they, from what I remember, they seem to be an overwhelming force. So you set out on your caravan to start kind of outrunning them. Is that how it got kicked off?
So, yeah, and one thing that I really like about the start of the first game is that there's so much, like, mystery to what is going on. So, yeah, I think you start off with 2 caravans from the start, because in each game you have kind of 2 different caravans that you're switching back and forth between. But kind of the high-level start of the game is the sun has stopped in the sky for some reason, and that the Dredge, this army of stone marauders is sweeping across part of the world. And so, yeah, I think the main impetus at the beginning of the game is like, hey, we got to get away from these things. So everybody's just kind of on the run.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the sun.
Yeah, like there's so much weird stuff at the start of the game. Like it opens with the line, "The gods are dead," and then it's like, and then the sun stopped in the sky, and now there are bad things.
Yeah, I guess
so very doom and gloom apocalyptic stuff.
Yeah,
they do a good job of setting that story through the dialogues, and yeah, I'm looking at a little bit of plot synopsis to help me remember, because as we've all discussed, like my memory is pretty spotty as well. But I guess you actually technically start with Ubin and Ludin, and they probably have sort of the civilization's perspective on what's happening. But then what I remember more is, like you said, when you switch to Rook, and that's kind of a small village, and he's just a huntsman, and he and his daughter are out on a hunt, and they run into a dredge, and they're like, "Oh, this is bad." But yeah, and I guess that also adds a lot of weight to it, because if it's just an army of invaders, that's a pretty classic story. Okay, like we're all going to band together, fight these mysterious enemies, and like save the day, right? But it's a little bit worse than that.
But yeah, it's not really even a fight. Like these are just people who can't stand up to this overwhelming force, and you pretty quickly take the role of like refugees trying to find a safe place.
Yeah, plus the fact that that the gods are dead and the sun has stopped. It's like, well, we're running for now. We're eking by. Like we're having to make a lot of tough decisions. But what comes next? Like, is there a way for this to actually have a happy ending? And I guess that actually segues, because I think one of the parts I remember from the first game as well is you leave your village. It's called like Skogger.
Yeah.
I don't know. Score.
For some reason I want to say Skoger.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I'll probably butcher all these pronunciations. So
I mean, we don't really. Sometimes names will come up because during some of so you have the caravan segments where you're traveling, and sometimes during those they'll have some kind of narration, and I feel like that was a town name that got said at some point.
Yeah,
it's the only reason I bring it up. But there's a lot of things in this game that don't get ever, because otherwise during the game none of the dialogue is voice acted, so there are a lot of names that you never actually get to hear the pronunciation. So we will be guessing at a lot of names for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But you leave your town, and this is like fresh starting out. So if you haven't, hopefully you've played the game if you're listening, but if you haven't played the game, like you just don't have a sense of what's going on. And then one of the first things you do is you leave your little hamlet or hunting village of Skoger, and then you go to this town, the slightly larger town, Frostveller. And that I remember just being a huge mess. Like things just go down in Frostveller and really like set the tone. Cause if I remember correctly, and I'll poke at the synopsis a little bit more, but you end up, this town is basically divided. You have tons of refugees coming in, like they don't have enough supplies for everybody. And then you start having factions kind of pull apart between like, I don't remember if it's like the local constable and one of his strongmen, or like you basically have these two factions, and neither of them are really that good or on the level. So your hamlet and your heroes kind of stroll in here, and you're like, hey, can we get some help here? And they give you like partial information. They try to spin you against the other guy, like and you end up getting into fights with these people, and like you basically have to choose, like, okay, well, am I going to side with this one guy or this other guy? And I that actually, one of the things I remember most is that actually affects a decision like a chapter or two later, because I am trying to remember the names of these people, but I remember I sided. So if you guys can help me out a little bit here,
I don't remember honestly.
I sided with the guy who seemed like a little more trustworthy. And the other guy, I took all his weapons and just left him there. So after you get to this town, you basically you can get into fights. Like you kind of pick a side, pick one of these two strong men to side with. And so I sided with one, and for the other one, after I beat him, I was like, well, I'm not going to kill him now, but I'm also not going to bring him with me. And he's also warning you, like, hey, don't trust this guy who you sided with. But I'm like, I don't trust you either. So you're staying here. But then I took all his weapons and basically left him to die.
And these games have a lot of that, where you have two conflicting sides, and like you said, you kind of get partial information or misinformation, and you have to make a choice. Like you kind of have to side a little more with one than the other without really knowing what the consequences will be, but there will be consequences. So it's you're constantly making decisions that feel bad.
Yeah, that's definitely a recurring thing. As often as this game can possibly do it, is like, make this hard choice that you don't fully understand, and then we're going to punish you for whichever one you take.
Yeah, and I do remember that one. I don't remember who I sided with or whatever, but I do remember that one that you bring up, Ryan, because that was, I think you're right, that was kind of one of the first big ones that happened in the game. So it was kind of setting the tone for that stuff.
Yeah, it's I think it's Onef and Ekil are the two.
I remember those guys now. Yeah,
are the two guys. Yeah, and Ekil is like, he's just kind of in your face and a jerk. And so I've ended up fighting against him. But what happened, and this is actually one of the most memorable events to me from the first game, is Onef, he betrays you. And he drags Alette off, and he kills her boyfriend, Egil, which I remember too, because Egil was actually a hero I had invested in. So that's something this game kind of does fairly regularly, is it lets you invest in people. And then
is Egil the like, there was one character in the first game that I remember seeing after I finished it. I looked up some stuff about it, and I think it was Egil who's like, there's like a dozen or more ways that he can die in the game, and there's like an achievement for keeping him alive. He's just like the most death prone character in that first part.
Yeah, just looking at like his page on the wiki, I see 4 different ways he can die.
I remember that I had the same thing. The guy you helped earlier would end up causing him to die if you made that choice.
According to this wiki, Egil starts out with weak stats, but is actually the human hero with the highest hit points, strength plus armor in the first game. So
that is funny. Yeah. I remember liking his like skill set. So yeah, he didn't make it for me. But that in particular, it kind of sets the tone of the first game, and that's, I think, one of the more memorable is kind of Frostveller. It's like almost your second encounter, and you have to decide between this guy who's a maniac and this guy who's basically who's literally like a backstabber.
Yep.
And from there, a lot of what I remember of the first game is constantly being on the run. You get a lot of history of the world, like you visit all the godstones, and you kind of you're mostly interacting with humans and Varl, which Varl are like these giant horned. They're still humanoid, but they're just really big and have horns, and they live hundreds of years.
Yeah, and they like don't reproduce.
You say they don't reproduce?
Yeah, they don't reproduce, which is an interesting thing, because like there's a set number of them. And when they're gone, they're just going to be gone.
Right? Yeah, and I do remember that coming up in later games of being like, yeah, we're the end anyway. So
yeah.
But yeah, you're learning a lot about the world, and you're constantly on the run. And I just remember feeling like that game, like whenever you think it can't get more dire, it does.
Then a giant snake comes out of the ground, and you're like, "What is that?"
Yeah, was that in the first game?
I think so.
There's a lot that I can't remember what was the first game and what was the second game.
I know in the second game there's a part where it can just literally smash your caravan in half.
Yeah, I think it makes appearances in the first game.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
The first game does have, you do meet, I think, you meet Avend.
Yeah,
Avend?
Juno and Avend show up, and they're kind of like spellcasters of this world.
And they help you in the final battle.
Yeah.
In Borisgard, I think.
And that whole first game, from when you meet them through the second game, they always seem very secretive, and like they know more about what's going on than anyone else, but they aren't telling anybody, and they know something about what this giant snake is, but yeah, they're just kind of mysterious, but very powerful in like kind of a terrifying way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in the first game, like when you use Avend, and I'll just call him Avend.
Yeah.
When you use him in combat, like, you know, he has the mend ability and the arc lightning, which both seem good. But then when they do like something in the story, it's like, okay, we're just gonna smash this bridge.
Yeah.
It's like giant, hundreds of years old stone bridge. Like, give us some time, and we'll just blow it to smithereens.
Yeah, and I was trying to figure out if that was in the first or second game. And yeah, that was in the first game where you had the choice to destroy that bridge, which was another big, I feel like, big moment in that first game.
Yeah, that was kind of the climax of the first part.
Well, not the.
Wasn't it?
I mean,
okay, maybe
I would say the end encounter was with Bellower was kind of the real climax.
Yeah.
But I mean, this was definitely one. It was probably the biggest moment. Like after that, but yeah, it's like this old Varl bridge that if you destroy it, it'll slow down the dredge chasing you a lot, because it's like really the only way across this chasm or whatever. But it has like it's a really significant bridge to the Varl and their culture and their history. Because is that like the Varl capital that you're at, where the bridge is? I can't remember.
I think that sounds right.
But yeah, I remember that being a big thing that has consequences that ripple. And I remember the game also portraying that as like a really like dire moment, like like, hey, if we don't slow down the dredge, we're going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, and you know, this kind of leads into one of the final decisions of the game, like one of these kind of dredge heroes, these like so-called unkillable Sunder kind of shows up. And you know, that's where things get really dicey, because you have these like this monstrous warrior kind of show up, and so you guys have to figure out like how to stop him or slow him down.
Yeah, and he's terrifying from what I remember. Like, they really do a good job of building up this immortal villain. Like, he's just going to crash through everything.
And so you have to, like, your menders, like your spellcasters, kind of like, they're like, okay, good. If you take this like silver arrow from this godstone, and we like kind of deceive him a little bit, like you weaken him down a bit, and then you shoot him with the arrow, we'll trick him into thinking that he's like quote unquote died. It's kind of this elaborate plan to basically put this guy down for a little bit, even though I think he's considered to be one of the dredge that is truly unkillable or something along those lines. And he kind of comes back and has a role in the later games, but this is also where one of the big decisions of the game happens, whether you let Rook or Alette fire this arrow that stops this rampaging like dredge warrior. And the game has a little bit of foreshadowing, but you know, I made this decision semi-blind. Like, you basically, you have this arrow, you have this plan. It's like, okay, we need to fight this battle against this big scary dredge. And then once he's weakened, like one of your main characters, either Rook or his daughter Alette, who both are, they're hunters, archers, like they get to shoot this arrow. And it turns out that, the game maybe hints at this a little bit, but it also kind of surprises you. Like whoever shoots the arrow, Bellower just comes down and just like murders that character. So one of your starting heroes, like, just is going to have to take an axe, and you get to choose which one it is.
Yeah, and I do remember them. I remember before I made the choice feeling like I knew whoever made the shot was likely going to die, because I remember them saying like, oh, this will attract his attention and it will be very dangerous. And I remember Rook basically saying like, I don't like to Alette, like I don't want you to be in danger from this. And I remember them arguing back, and then Alette was like, oh, I'm the best archer, I should take the shot. Like I remember them having like a back and forth about it.
Right.
So it was clear, maybe not fully to the extent that they were going to die, but it was very clear that it was very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And since it gives you that very clear choice of you get to pick who's going to do it, and they had made it clear that it was dangerous, I do remember feeling like, oh yeah, whoever I choose is going to die.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of foreshadowing, and this game has already let you know that it doesn't pull punches. So
yeah.
You're right that it's not like a truly blind decision, but at the same time, this game also throws curveballs, so you don't know that the person who doesn't take the shot isn't going to be the one who dies. I don't know. I do remember feeling that way. It's like, well, if I let Alette take the shot, will he just kill Rook anyway?
Yeah, they could have gone that way. But yeah, so you get to pick. It's kind of your two main characters, story-wise. At that point, you get to pick which one's going to continue on through the rest of the trilogy.
And that was a power. Like I remember the ending of that game being pretty powerful. Because I had Rook survive, Alette died, and there was the ending scene of that game was basically like putting her on a boat, and I guess as per their custom for people they loved who had passed on, like putting them on a boat with like all these candles or whatever, and like kind of pushing them out to sea.
Yep.
And they have their each of these games I feel like has an ending song. In whatever language they're in, very somber. I remember that being like a good scene.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess to backtrack just a little bit, I was reading the wiki, and at the bridge is Bellower was there. Ivor was fighting and distracting Bellower to buy time, and got hit, and that's where he lost his arm. Because in the rest of the trilogy, he doesn't have an arm.
Yeah.
And also the big serpent popped up at the bridge as well. So a lot of stuff was popping off at that bridge.
Yeah.
Okay, I had forgotten about the serpent.
Yeah, and I believe that was the first time you saw the serpent. So like reading this and triggering my memory, I think like a lot of people really freaked out when they saw the serpent, and I think like the masses at large like really started to lose hope at that point, because it's like, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, exactly.
Which that is kind of a neat nod, because I mean, even though this game isn't directly based on Norse mythology, they have, like the world, this sort of kind of parallel to the world serpent. And
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a heavy emphasis of like Viking mythology and Norse mythology stuff in this game, just in terms of the types of monsters and characters and themes.
Yeah, it's not explicitly based, but there's a lot of, I think you could probably make a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
So I guess that continues into the second game. And I don't know if you...
I was just going to say, I guess before we go into the second game, like, do either of you have kind of like, I guess like just overall, like when you played Banner Saga 1 back when it came out, like how did you come out of that feeling?
I think the world and the way they handle player choices and consequences and just the escalation of the dangers and everything, that really was what struck me. I think the combat system I liked even in the first game, but I probably didn't love it until later in the series. But yeah, that initial pitch of the world and then the escalation of just how dire things get in that first game and where it ends was really strong. I just liked that journey a lot, for sure.
Yeah, I also like the journey a lot. And you used the word mystery earlier. I think the first part did a good job of constantly revealing mystery, answering some things, but also still leaving mystery to be solved for later. And like you said, constantly being dire. I actually liked the combat in the first game because it was a different system and mentality from other
absolutely
turn-based, tactical combat in other games.
I absolutely was not down on it. I liked it. I think it was a case of, by the time I got to the end of that game, I felt like I finally understood the combat.
Yeah.
And then in the second and third one, I was like, okay, I actually get what this is now, and I really like it.
That's interesting, because I think I almost had the reverse effect of I enjoyed learning it in the first game, and then through the second and third games, I think it started to get a little tiresome just because I felt like I was going through the motions. Once I had learned it.
Yeah, that's fair.
It became, once it became less novel, I think I got a little more bored with it.
It is interesting, in terms of, I was kind of planning to mention this at some point. I guess now's as good a time as any, to do the combat discussion. But it's interesting because, I felt like in the first game, it felt a little more, the battles felt a little more balanced. I mean, obviously, especially on normal difficulty, I could tell that sometimes they pulled their punches because they didn't know which characters you would have and who you would invest in, so they couldn't make the battles too challenging. But I guess because they had a narrower range of heroes in the first game, they had those battles were actually, they felt a little bit more challenging and kind of balanced. I still enjoy, they added new mechanics and new heroes, and I still enjoyed the battles in the later games, but I felt like they pulled their punches, and they, because they had to give you catch up experience in case, they took away heroes that were critical to you or split your caravan. I found that in those later games, they kind of had to give you catch up methods, which made the battles a little bit easier overall.
I think that's probably right. The first game is a lot more of a controlled experience, whereas when you get to the end of this 40 to 50 hour journey, who knows what characters you have and what level they're at and what items you've gotten.
Yeah. So they definitely have some of that, which is good. I mean, I think it's good that maybe on their hard difficulty they would punish you for making kind of wrong decisions, but as you're playing through, you don't know which of these impossible choices will end up having you lose too many invested heroes to make these battles unwinnable.
Looking at this wiki, it breaks it down by each game, the possible player characters at your disposal. And this list for the third game is just huge. And the first game is pretty manageable. But yeah, I really I felt like the first game had a good arc. It started, it kept ramping up, it had a really effective ending, and a lot of interesting points along the way. And then rolled into we'll go ahead and roll into the second part. Part of me wants to call the Bulwark Saga. Yeah. So the second game, as we said up top, like picks up right where the first one left off. And from what I remember for like again, you guys may remember some more details. What I remember for probably like the first half-ish of the game is, for the most part, Rook and company are still on the run.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the big new characters early in the game is Bulwark, who's like a berserker, Varl type dude who leads a mercenary band.
Yeah, so unlike a lot of the other Varl who are steeped in tradition and honor to the king and stuff, he's just like, nah, I'm gonna run my mercenary group and do whatever I want, and I'm a crazy man.
He wants to get money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you learn pretty early on just like how crazy he is, and like I feel like there were a couple early combat scenarios where like he had some ability where like if he kills someone he gets an extra turn or something like that.
Yeah, he's crazy overpowered.
Yeah, but I just remember having some battles where he just like murders everything.
Yeah. He does like tons of damage, he gets like multiple attacks, and yeah, he gets like these frenzies where if he gets kills, he gets to keep going. So he's just insane.
Yeah, I feel like there was even an achievement for him like killing like 10 people in one turn or something absurd like that. And it was actually pretty easy to get it because he's just a monster.
Yeah.
But I forget how he crosses paths with your group. I don't actually remember how that first.
Yeah, I don't quite remember because his mercenary group is called the Ravens, and at some point you link up with them. I don't remember if your caravan like hires their services or just happens to cross paths and are going the same direction, but they get mingled together in some way.
Oh, that's right. It looks like maybe an Ormsdaler.
Yeah.
But I think Juno hires him.
That might be right.
Quote unquote hires him.
Yeah, she does some mind control on him at some point.
Yeah, which he does not like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you might be right, Ryan, that Juno and the Valka like kind of, because they're just mercenaries, like they'll do whatever people want as long as they get their money.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Juno knew that he's really strong, so it's like, we could use this muscle. We need that.
Yeah, we need you to take this giant mysterious box to the Tower of the Valka.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that was Bellower's body, right?
Yeah.
Was it now? Because you don't know that. You just know that you're delivering this giant mysterious box.
Yeah, at that point in time, you don't know it, but that is what it was.
That's what it is. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that plays into the ending.
Yeah. Yeah, so you link up with him, and you're kind of still, from what I remember, on the run. At some point, you link up kind of the new race that's introduced in Banner Saga 2, or the Horseborn.
Yep.
So you also kind of link up with some of them at some point. I don't remember if there was anything super important around like meeting them, but
yeah. So the thing the problem I have with the Banner Saga 2, trying to think back to it, is like, I know there's a lot of stuff that happened that was a longer of the 3 parts. I feel like that might have been the longest one.
From what I remember, it felt like the longest.
And I just don't remember like a lot of specific events. And I do, the main feeling I remember having when I finished it was like, yeah, a lot of that was kind of filler.
Yeah, I feel like this was definitely the part of the trilogy where it's like you're just doing the hard stuff. Like,
yeah,
you're on the run, fighting battles. It's tiring. Like, you're making tough decisions. But like, yeah, I don't remember really anything big happening. I mean, other than the ending, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe some of the stuff with Rugga, which we'll also get to.
Oh God.
I think you guys, I sort of have some of the same feelings, and I think you guys have hit on some of, like, because there are multiple plot points going on. And I mean, your group, like Rook's caravan is basically trying to reach Arborang, the human capital.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, filler might be a tad harsh because they do introduce the Horseborn, and you go through like plains and swamps.
And I guess Bulwark and Rugga are 2 of the most important characters in this trilogy that have a lot of play in this game, in this part.
Yeah, but it is true that there's a lot going on, and a lot of it, and less of it, I think, is critical to Rook's Caravan.
Yeah.
There's probably also some character development with like Ludin, the human prince. Like he probably gets some more development. But yeah, the events I remember the most. I do remember the Horseborn and going through some of the swamps. I do remember the serpent, that event you mentioned in the first game. Like, because you like, I think you come through Ormsdollar or somewhere. You've like, maybe Avend has created this like this bridge out of like just floating rocks. Like, I don't remember something like, you get through some harrowing event, and then like the serpent just pops up and splits your caravan in half and like kills, like a third of your people or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's when you see, like in my game, I still had Rook, and he starts to crack a little bit, and Ivor's like, I don't think there was anything you could have done. You're doing the best you can. Like, there's nothing you could have done to predict like a giant snake just smashing through and killing so many people. Like, let's just pick up and go.
Yep. I think there is a lot going on in this journey towards the end of the part 2, and like I feel like it probably all feels important and relevant at the moment, and there's some character development and a little bit more world building, but I think, when I got to the end, I was just like, okay, there wasn't anything that I really need to keep in mind.
I wonder, in retrospect now, if maybe the first and third ones just kind of had a more identifiable through line you could follow, whereas 2 had a lot going on, but maybe it was more scattered and harder to summarize concisely.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of that, because Rook's caravan, or Rook/Alette's caravan, goes to Arborang.
It's Rook's caravan.
No, Rook's dead.
They introduce the Ravens, and they build up the Ravens, and they really do a lot of foreshadowing around the mystery of Juno and Avend.
Correct me, I don't know if either of you two remember this. I feel like in my head, part 2 is where they learned that the Dredge weren't out to kill them; they were just running from the darkness as well.
Yeah, some characters at least were starting to figure that out.
Yeah, so it kind of shed a little light that the Dredge are just another race dealing with the same problems everyone else is dealing with. They're not just this mindless, bloodthirsty horde.
Yeah.
Which was kind of that was a fairly significant revelation that like recontextualized what's going on in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know if they explicitly showed it before like the very end of part 2, but there's that encroaching darkness, which is just like this huge bubble that's spreading across the world.
Which I have a funny point about that when we get to part 3, but they like whenever you go look at your map, you just see this big black purple blob that's like, all right, anything within this blob is just dead.
Gone, yeah.
And that's what the Dredge are really running from, and it just happens that all these humans and Varl and Horseborn are in the way.
Yeah, because that darkness started in the Dredge lands, which are up north. So they kind of got caught by it first and started panicking and fleeing, and because there's so many misunderstandings, but another consistent theme in this game is like all the different races, there's a lot of tension and misunderstanding. So like when Dredge just start fleeing into human and Varl lands, like conflict.
Basically considered an invasion. And to a certain extent, like some of the Sunder also have bad blood, and in the third game, like with Ruin in particular, but I think Belor as well, like they basically are leading armies, and they basically are invading and killing people along the way.
Yeah.
I know
they're not really good guys either.
No, they're not. Then again, I don't know that anyone.
No, there's really no good guys in this world.
So 3. You guys might have more. There's kind of 3. I'm kind of poking at this wiki. There's kind of 3 things I want to touch on for part 2, and one of them is something I don't remember at all. But apparently, the big Sunder in part 2 was named Eyeless. And my question for you two is, do you two remember anything about Eyeless? Because I don't.
Was that in the part where you were underground with Juno and them? There was a part in 2, I think, where they were going underground and there were just dredge everywhere. Right.
According to this wiki, It was encountered with Bolverk's caravan in the underworld caves.
Yeah, and there was a Sunder down there that I vaguely remember.
They build that up a little bit, but I feel like that's one of the easier fights.
Yeah.
And it's one of the less epic encounters. You just kind of like...
It's because you have Bolverk.
And there is that too, yeah.
But in the first part, like, I think they did such a good job at making Belor just seem so terrifying. And if this was the Sunder of part 2, like, it did not have anywhere near the same impact.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember thinking that at the time. I do remember them starting to build up a Sunder, and then it just like popped up into a fight with it, and then you just knock it over and keep going.
Yeah, and that one too is also, it's like a stone singer.
Yeah, it's one of those like dredge spellcaster kind of guys.
Yeah, which those guys can be dangerous, and I definitely, I remember thinking, oh wow, if she hits me and poisons me and does all this damage. And she did that like once, but for the most part she just goes off and starts doing spellcasting animations, and it's like, okay, well I guess I'll just kill your whole I'll just use
Bolverk to murder everything.
Smash through your all your friends, and then like it's just you versus my entire caravan or something. It was something like that, where that Sunder spends so much time like casting spells that it's just not that threatening.
Yeah.
So there's this guy. His name is Rugga.
Yeah.
He's a big part of part 2.
And 3.
And 3, yes. But he's introduced in part 2.
Yeah.
And this drives a lot of, like, I forget exactly where in part 2 you meet him. It might actually be kind of early on. I don't remember.
I don't really remember either.
But like once you meet Rugga, sorry?
He plays into Arborang, but I think you don't meet him until, I don't know if it's at Arborang or you pick him up in one of the towns and you're kind of grudgingly forced to go along with him.
I think it's that. I think you pick him up on the way to Arborang. I don't remember how far away it is, but yeah, he's somewhere on the way there.
It's funny though, because he definitely was a big part of 3, and I do remember some of the, like, getting into Arborang and like his role there, but for some reason that part of the game is less memorable to me than like the Valka Tower. And I think some of that was gameplay. So that's the part I think I'll be that I wanted to cover as the other kind of the ending on Bolverk's half. But yeah.
And I was going to get to that after Rugga. That was the third thing, because that's the ending with Bolverk is very clearly
the finale of part 2.
Yeah, the finale, and I would say also the most dramatic moment of part 2.
I guess.
But Rugga has an important role, and you spend time with Rugga and start to see how much of a slimy snake he is.
Yeah, he's just the worst person.
The worst person.
I do remember, now that I think about it, like, because when you get to Arborang, you have some decisions to make about like whether you side with the king, whether you fight your way in, like, whether you side with the people. And I remember that was kind of tough. And I remember, you get there with Hakan, and he just straight up, like, the king makes room for the Varl, and he's just like, sorry, I need to take care of my people. And I was like, well, I guess this makes the decision, I was like, I don't really want to abandon everyone else, but it's like, I also don't want to fight Hakan.
I was with the Varl every time that was a choice, because I ain't fighting those dudes.
Yeah. I mean, it was already like a tough decision, but when he was like, he's like, the king has made room for me, and I'm going in. It's also really cool. I guess I'll just say this, and then but I remember you when Rook meets the king, in my game it was Rook, but when Rook meets the king, that was a pretty cool moment because he's like, the king, they play the king pretty well in that game. He's kind of an authoritative figure, and he's like, so you're this guy who I keep hearing about. And I thought that was a cool moment because, Rook is sort of like a hero.
Yeah, you're right. That is a good moment because, Rook was at the beginning of the first game, he wasn't really anybody, and he kind of reluctantly fell into leading this caravan, and or I guess Alette, if you went that way. He's never seemed like someone who wanted to be a leader, and people just followed him because they trusted him, and his events, just what has happened throughout the entire of parts 1 and 2, he's kind of built up this reputation.
Yeah.
And that reputation has reached the king.
Yep.
So it was kind of a nice moment of acknowledging oh yeah, you've been through some stuff and come out the other end. But yeah, I remember with Rugga it wasn't immediately, and I think they actually did a pretty good job with him.
Yeah, he's a really well-made character, even though I hate everything about him.
Yeah, but he's well-made because you didn't realize how terrible he was. Yes. Or at least I didn't. It took me a while to fully realize how terrible he was.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to own up to this. He played me like a fiddle through both of these games.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the genius of Rugga is that he's the worst.
Yeah, he is the worst.
He's also incredibly smart, incredibly resourceful, very crafty, and he's good at manipulating people to get what he wants.
Yeah, and he puts people who are in positions of power into situations where they feel like they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
But to do what he wants them to do.
Yeah. And that's that manipulation. He can create impossible choices for people. He pulls all the strings.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't remember all the details at the end of part 2 of what he does, but I do remember you get to Arborang and basically everybody hates him.
Yeah.
And you have to try to negotiate how you're going to get your people inside the walls.
Yeah, and there's
that was such a messy process.
Yeah, I for as much of part 2 that I don't remember, I remember all of those my resounding memory of Rugga and everything, and beating the king and getting to Arborang. I remember that whole sequence of trying to parse what everyone was saying and all of the debates and trying to make those decisions. I remember feeling that was one of the toughest sequences of decision making in the entire trilogy.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know who to trust. I don't know who's lying, who's being,
Exactly.
I just remember all of that just feeling terrible. The game wants you to feel terrible about the decisions you're making all the time. And I remember that feeling some of the worst.
Yeah.
And did you guys, I don't know if you mentioned in terms of talking about Rugga, he had tried to kill the king or something like that and had or the king had tried to kill him.
Yeah, they had some.
It was very clear that they did not like each other.
Yeah, I mean, Rugga I think he was one-armed because of his relationship with the king.
Yeah, and that was a big hurdle with trying to get all of your people in to Arborang into safety, was that Rugga just had made so many enemies that they weren't going to trust anybody that he was with.
Yeah. Did either of you have any doubts about King was just at that point in time? Were either of you I don't even know if the king, if we get in the walls, is the king going to be a reasonable person to deal with and all of this stuff? And
yeah, I think I definitely remember not liking the king at that point because he wouldn't let these refugees in.
Right.
And just being well, he's a terrible ruler. Why wouldn't you let these people in? There's dredge right there. We're all going to die. So I don't remember specifically all the decisions I made, but I know by that point I was playing as Alette instead of Rook. And I was playing her basically as I guess like the naive idealist who was going to try to save everybody no matter what. And it was like, I don't really care what my reputation is. We're just going to try to save as many people as we can.
Right.
And so like I ended up working with Raga more than I probably should have because it felt like that was the way to maximize, saving people.
And he kind of, I mean, in his manipulative ways, he kind of played on the idealistic heartstrings of like,
oh yeah.
I mean, in the third game, he basically says he's like, he basically identifies himself as the populist, right?
Yes, he almost explicitly says it. Yeah, like I'll raise the masses.
You can't get rid of me, because there are disenfranchised people out there who need a voice.
Yeah,
and I'm the one to turn to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I remember all that stuff being like, for as much of the second part that was forgettable, I do feel like the Rugga stuff was pretty important.
But I guess to your question, from my perspective, like, I mean, I don't know that I fully trusted the king, and his name was what, Meinhof?
Meinhof, yeah.
Meinhof. But at the same time, I felt like he was kind of on the level, and that we had kind of done right by Luden. So I mean, he was in a tough position too, and he was having to make decisions based about. So, I felt like in my dealings with him, he was usually like, he's like, yeah, I've seen a lot of heroes, I've seen a lot of leaders and strongmen. He's like, if you want my help, like, this is going to have to be like a pragmatic relationship.
Yeah. That just reminded me that Luden is the prince, Meinhof's son, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And in my game, he totally died on the way to Arbor.
Oh, wow.
And
How did he die?
I think that's why I had a much more hostile relationship with the king.
Oh, no.
Oh, that's hilarious. Do you remember how he died, or?
There was some kind of fight at some point, because he was like a pampered pretty boy, like kind of a dipshit. And there was some fight at some point where like we had gotten surrounded or ambushed, or like people had gotten cut off, and he came up to Alette and was like, I want to go save those people. Like, let me take some people and I'll go save them while you deal with this other thing. And I was like, all right. And then he died.
Great.
I mean, and to be fair, Luden, I actually liked his character. Because at the very beginning, like you said, he comes across as this, like, I don't know what the right word is, but you kind of know the type, right? Like from he's grown up as a prince, but he doesn't really have a place.
Yeah.
So he's got a chip on his shoulder and he's got an attitude. But as you kind of, especially in the third game, but even along the first and second games, he's not really a bad guy. He's just like, I don't carry the authority of a prince.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think that's just a tough position for him to be in. And he's, at the very beginning, he comes across as a little bit childish, but
yeah.
As the story goes and with all the events that are happening, he very rarely like bucks your authority. Like he doesn't try to, especially as things go on, he doesn't try to like step in and get in your way.
Right.
So
anyway, Volca Tower.
Yeah.
So let me set the stage for my game here. So if I remember correctly, around that time, Juno and Ivan come to the Volca Tower, and that's around the time they come with Ivor, right? They convince Ivor to join them to help them take care of this important task. And that's when Bolverk and the Ravens get there, or they get there a little bit before. And they basically like beat up the Volca, I guess, because you learn at that point that they're technically refugees. And I don't know if they explain all the details at that specific time, but then Bolverk shows up, and I think he begins to realize, or he's been kind of losing his mind, I guess, from carrying Belor's body. that has like affected him. So things start to come together there, and from a story perspective, Juno and Ivan kind of, or Avon. Sorry, they kind of say, they convince Ivor like, "Hey, we want to try and fix this problem."
Mm-hmm.
But then they get to the tower, and like Avon just like goes ballistic, and he like beats down one of the Valka in the tower, and he's like, "I didn't want it to come to this." And that guy's like, "Wait, you expect me to you expected like to walk in like a fugitive and a corpse to like come in and like without a fight?" I don't know. I remember that being like a very interesting sequence where they come to this Valka tower saying they want to solve this problem, and they basically have to fight the Valka.
Right.
And Ivor's kind of there with them, and he's like, "What is going on?
Yeah,
why am I helping you?"
I feel like I was confused about a lot of what they were doing at this point in the story, which maybe was intentional.
Yeah, there was definitely plenty of that. But the funny thing, and one of the most memorable parts of that to me, is that so Bulwark shows up, and I think around that time the box falls open and you see that it's Bellower's body. And they kind of clearly in the art start to show you that like Bellower has somehow affected Bulwark's mind, and he's just fuming and furious, especially at Juno.
Yeah, because I feel like he probably learned that Juno had been kind of mind controlling him and gets pissed off about that.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So he wants to kill Juno, and Ivor's there and has agreed to protect them. So, Ivor steps in, and you basically have this battle, and it's the last battle of the game. Well, turns out, Bulwark, he's kind of the lead of one of your caravans, and he's amazing. So I had beefed him up quite a bit.
Yeah.
But Ivor, on the other hand...
And now he's the final boss fight.
Yeah, Ivor, on the other hand, I hadn't really used or upgraded much since the first game. so I have this like level 2, level 3 Ivor going up against this like max level Bellower, and I could not win that fight. I literally could not win that fight.
And you don't have to win it. I forget what it affects, but
I don't know what it affected, but I remember losing that fight pretty hard.
Yeah,
and I would guess they don't make you win that fight because they can't account for how much you've been using Bulwark or Ivor up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember. I think I tried loading a couple times, and then I lost the battle, and the story just kind of rolled right on, which was surprising to me. But like
do you remember if you won that fight, Nate? Like, had you used Ivor a lot up to there? Was he?
I feel like I did. I mean, I definitely had relied on Bulwark because he's just amazing.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
But I think I had gotten Ivor to a point where I was able to win. I'm pretty sure I did. I remember that being a hard fight.
Oh yeah, I remember it being tricky. I remember feeling like, because Ivor was actually one of my staples, so he was very high, if not whatever the max level for Banner Saga 2 was. But even with that, I still remember feeling like I had to borderline, like, I won't say cheese probably isn't the right word, but I remember having to be very like crafty in that fight. Like,
definitely.
Because even like a max level Ivor still in just a straight up fight cannot beat Bulwark.
Yeah. And there's all these like terrain effects in that fight with like lightning coming down that you have to knock Bulwark into to like be able to do damage to him. It was interesting, but a very challenging fight.
Yeah. And I don't know if you remember this, Ryan. I don't remember exactly what the Menders, like Avon and Juno, were trying to accomplish at that tower.
That's what I was always confused about, and I never feel like I understood.
Yeah, they don't. I think it was maybe something to do with either finding a way to push back the darkness, or maybe finding a way to to like get through the darkness.
Yeah.
I think because I think they didn't want to go back to where the problem had started.
Right. Like what they end up doing in part 3 was plan B, I think, right? Like,
yeah.
Because what they wanted to do at the tower originally ended up failing, and the tower explodes at the end of part 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
maybe
Zephyr,
they were going to meet the other Menders to see if they could help.
Yeah, I don't know.
They couldn't, and that's why Avon went nuts. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he did go nuts because there was like conflict there, and there was a lot of bad blood. I mean, they basically put the Volca basically sentenced Juno to death, and so I don't think he had a lot of love for them. And so I think when they gave him some flack, he just really like they tell in the third game that like his power actually makes him a little bit mentally unstable.
Yeah.
And I think between like, maybe some of the stuff that was going on with Juno usually keeps that in check. She's like, so yeah, this is layers upon layers, but they explain this a lot more in the third game. But Juno was sentenced to death because she dabbled in manipulating people's minds.
Right, which is forbidden in their group.
Yeah, the Volca strictly forbid. Part of the reason she did that was because Avon was a male, like one of the kind of a rare male Volca with a lot of power.
Yeah.
But that comes with sort of this mental instability. And historically, all of the men in that category have basically lost their minds.
Yeah.
So she dabbles in that partly to help him because she's in, they are in love. But whenever it's discovered, they sentence her to die. And then Avon pulls the sun down to bring her back to life.
Yeah, basically.
So that's kind of
kicks off the events of this entire trilogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think in the third game they also show that Zephyr was at the Volca Tower trying to find a way to resist the darkness. So that's probably what Juno and Avon were going for.
Right.
Yeah, that was the dramatic end of part 2, and Bolverk was possessed by Bellower, and he lives, I guess, regardless of however the fight goes, whether you beat him or not.
Yeah.
And I think we've already kind of said this. I guess at the time, how did we all feel about part 2? What it sounds like, and this is where I stand, for the most part, it's like, yeah, it was kind of a longer game with a lot more, felt like maybe a little bit more of a combat slog, or like there was portions of the game that didn't feel as important narratively, even though a lot of the stuff around Bolverk or the Volca or Rugga was fairly important. There was also, I think, a lot of time, because I feel like it was slightly longer than the other parts.
Yeah.
There were times that maybe it didn't need to have everything in it had.
Yeah, I think it was a little too long for what happens in it, maybe, for me, but I did enjoy seeing different layers added to the combat with Horseborn and Bolverk and different other classes that get added in too. But yeah, I still like where it ends up, for sure.
So part 3, which Banner Saga 3 kind of has a different, because most of Banner Saga 1 and 2, you're on the run trying to make it to Arborang. Banner Saga 3, you start already in Arborang, and so like
Rooker doesn't really leave.
Yeah, and you're basically there the rest of the game.
Yeah.
So like their caravan has a very different role where you're just like Dredge are also trying to get into the city, and you're basically fighting them off constantly.
Yeah.
And there's some slightly different mechanics tied into that, because like you no longer have like this like we're traveling and need supplies, and like like some of those mechanics for the caravan stuff like just don't really play anymore.
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of an interesting twist. But you still kind of get the caravan part with, because so you bounce back and forth between them and Arborang, and then the other group, which is basically Ivor, the Valka, and the remnants of the Ravens.
Yeah.
Traveling, they actually turn around and go back into the darkness, and their plan B, as we mentioned earlier, try and put it into things. So Rook and Alette and them are trying to hold out while that other group tries to put an end to it. And at the end of part 3 of Banner Saga 3, there's actually a lot of like bouncing back and forth of like the Arborang group trying to buy time for the other group to complete their task.
Yeah, which is like the most tense thing ever.
Yeah, like I think they did a pretty good job of making it feel just like super dire and oppressive and tense, and like that final section where you're marching through with the Ivor's group, we'll call it, in the darkness, just felt like such a death march of like, we're gonna keep pushing, keep fighting, we don't have time to stop and heal.
Yeah.
So like one of the mechanics of the whole trilogy is like if someone goes down in battle, they're injured for so many days, and what that means is they start the battle with less strength, which strength is both their health and attack power in this game. So like it's bad to have negative strength, but like you're so like you don't have time to heal, so it's like you're just fighting these sequences of battles without being able to heal, and like it was pretty rough. And then like you're bouncing back and forth to Arborang to try and buy time.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if you guys had this. Like, I mean, my group with Ivor was fairly strong, but like, I felt like my group in Arborang was just like, they were just unstoppable.
Yeah, I kind of had the same thing. You have a deeper roster there, I think.
Yeah, and some like, pretty good characters.
Yeah, some pretty good characters could have made it through to that point. So yeah, whenever I had battles in Arborang, they were pretty much cakewalks.
Yeah, and then the battles with Ivor's group were just like, man, this is how are we making it through this?
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's possible to get to a point with that group where you're just like so far beat down that you're just like, I can't make it.
I guess maybe it's possible. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely had some of that sense, but it wasn't quite as cut and dry because my Raven group probably wasn't as strong. Plus, it felt harder for them to get good items. But I felt like they held in pretty well. And although I do remember, there were definitely a couple battles where I did some pretty cheesy things. And then they didn't make them quite as hard. And but I did lose someone very important in Arborang, which might have hurt my party strength a little bit. A lot.
So yeah, that was, I feel like there's maybe less of a like twisting arc part 3 because of the setup.
Yeah. It really is like a really long finale for the series. Like you could imagine this being a 2-part series where they cut out some of the traveling and that's in what we have as parts 1 and 2, and just had like a couple hours on the end of the second part that was what's in part 3. But like them having this whole part be like this grand finale, I think works really well.
Yeah, I think it was because I don't think I needed a third game of like traveling across the land.
Yeah, and like you said, like the way they changed that mechanic, because one of the things we talked about too, feeling not necessarily bad, but just maybe like not as memorable, is because in the first game they introduce kind of the caravan and the supplies, and you know you're concerned about how many people you have and how many clansmen, how many fighters, how many Varl, and like how many supplies, and you know you're kind of trying to carefully trade and manage your morale and supplies and stuff like that. You don't know what I didn't always know what that stuff meant, but I knew I didn't want my people to starve, and I didn't want them to like start with no morale.
Yeah.
But then
I don't
when
know that I need the third game of juggling that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, when you're managing the same stuff in the second game, it feels less impactful because they're having to find ways to like give you that stuff that. But then in the third game, it's just like, yeah, okay, so whatever you do in arboring buys you X number of days, and then the small group of the ravens, they, you make decisions of how you spend those days.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really smart way to play that out. And I think I had to go back to arborang like 2 or 3 times. They were like, the dredge had breached the outer 2 walls or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's probably pretty common, I would guess.
Yeah, that's probably about what I did. Like, had to go back 2 or 3 times. The whole district of the city like got burnt and pillaged by rioters, and like some of the walls were getting breached. So it was definitely dire.
Yeah, I saw there's actually an achievement for only having to go back once, which I definitely did not get.
Yeah.
But I was like, man, like you would have to just be really on top of. I mean, I feel like the way to do that would be like basically throughout the entire game with the Raven group of like never resting or making any choices that added more time. Like you would have to be fully on top of everything.
Yeah, or maybe if you somehow ended up with like a massive number of supplies from the previous 2 games, that would buy you a bunch of extra days. So
I think one of the main talking points to me about this game's story is just all of the political crap in arborang. And I feel like all of that Rugga setup in part 2 kind of led to these struggles in the town. And I almost came away from Banner Saga 3 thinking that this was some of the main themes of the entire trilogy of like, how do people respond when the end of the world is coming or whatever. And like,
turns out they don't respond well.
There's a lot of people doing things for their own selfishness or greed, like not really showing concern or being willing to help others. And it's a lot of like conflicting interest stuff. And Rugga, who we already talked about being just the worst. Just, in Banner Saga in part 3 just really ramps it up and just shows exactly how much a piece of work he is.
Yeah.
So for the record, I killed Rugga.
I was about to ask, did anybody just kill him? Because there's a point when you have him in prison and you get a dialogue option to just kill him. And I almost did it, but I didn't.
I was very tempted to.
Yeah, I stared at that screen for a good 5 minutes.
You and me both.
I mean, at that point though, because he like poisons the king to death, and he's like turning his people against you, like in the midst of this crisis. And then you come to him, and I mean, you can tell he's he's a very tactical, smart guy. And it's funny too, because he calls himself like a man of peace. He's like, he's like, I just really care about what happens after all this blows over.
Foolish shit.
Yeah.
But for me, I was like, all right, you crossed the line. You killed the king. Like there's just, this is a situation where you don't walk away. The thing that surprised me is, he's chained to a wall and you're confronting him. And when I chose to kill him, I thought of it being like kind of a clean execution. Like, you murdered a king, you deserve to die.
Sure.
Apparently, though, Rook decided to just beat him to death with his fists.
Oh, nice.
And it was very descriptive about like this bloody beatdown. And I was like, oh man. I was like, that's kind of like brutal.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing, though.
It is kind of amazing.
I took him around, like, I mean, because he threatens you that, like, if at any point he dies, his people are going to stir up some shit.
And they do.
Okay, so you end up having to, like, fight his people, I guess?
Yeah, there was a battle. It was like his right-hand man. And there's a battle, like, he's trying to stir up people. And that's around the part where you're making a decision whether or not you let the dredge in.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, because Odd Life.
I always thought it was Odd Leaf, but I don't know.
I'll just call her Odd. That's what they call her
There
in
you
the
go.
game. She's kind of like, we should let the dredge in. Like we should, they're not our enemies. And I was like, I don't know if I can defend the dredge. Not right now in front of this angry crowd of people. But then, yeah, basically he's like, all right, if you like these dredge so much, why don't you go out there? Yeah. And I was like, okay. I mean, I guess if this is the right thing to do, like, and that's when Rook died. So
yeah. Did he die from the dredge?
Nope, he died from the humans.
Yeah, that's what happened for me as well.
So you go out there and they throw spears or whatever they did at you, shoot arrows, or
like it was a pretty intense scene because I was with Alette obviously, but it's probably the same. You like go out there and lay down your weapons.
And did you guys have the dredge child?
I did not.
I did. No, I don't think so.
Okay. So I had the child with me.
Okay.
So when I went out, so Rook never died in my game.
Nice.
When I walked, I'm sorry?
You jerk. Congratulations, you jerk.
Maybe that's why everything in Arboring felt so easy.
Oh, man.
So when I walked out, I had the dredge child with me, which I don't even remember where we got that. It must have been in part 2 somewhere.
I think it's probably in the first game, actually.
Yeah, it wasn't in the third game because that's the most recent one that I remember. But yeah, so Odd Leaf walks out there with me. So like I'm like, all right, I said like I'll go let them in. I'll open the gate. And I remember there being another choice of like, do you want to go by yourself or do you want like talking to Odd and being like, do you want me to come with you? Do you want to bring the baby? I remember there being like multiple choices you can make.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I just had all 3 of us come out. So like Rook went out and Odd came out carrying the dredge child basically to like try and show like basically the way she positioned it is show like, hey, we're taking care of this kid. We mean no harm. So instead of Rook dying, she died.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, that kind of seemed to like endear us to the dredge of being like, oh, like
right.
at least these 2 humans were trying to help us and like,
yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so Rook lived but Odd died.
Okay.
Which Rook was very upset about.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole scene was a very, very tense scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it didn't play out quite as I mean, obviously I didn't expect Rook to die, but also just the way things played out with those people kind of stirring things up. Like I was a bit confused at how that went. I think they dropped Zephyr in and she's like, you need to get the dredge inside.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the catalyst.
Yeah, I remember her showing up around then. And I think also like Rook living and kind of, well, I don't know if it's specifically Rook living, but like actually going through all of that, I think like, I feel like that was the moment that Rugga kind of got shut up for good, like put in his place.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Like kind of called his bluff, so to speak.
Yeah, because I didn't kill him in the prison, and then he, of course, escapes and rouses up this rabble. And then he's like, "Oh yeah, if you love him so much, go out there," like you were saying earlier. Mm-hmm. And I was like, "All right." I was like, wanted to give him a middle finger and walk away. But then, of course, his people killed Alette when she came back in.
Right. But I feel like. So do you remember what happened with Rugga after that? Like.
He just kind of vanished from the game.
Yeah, I feel like at that point of the story, regardless, he kind of just slinks into the background.
Yeah.
And I feel like how that was portrayed in my game was kind of like, oh, called his bluff. His words don't have any weight anymore. So he just kind of slinked away.
Yeah.
In my game, he was dead.
Yeah, in your game he was. In mine, I feel like it wasn't necessarily like that. I had beaten him in that way. It was more like I had the sense that like when Alette went out the gate, he was surprised, and then when one of his people killed her, he was also surprised by that. And I think I got the sense that he felt like he had lost control too.
Right.
Like that wasn't what he expected or wanted to happen necessarily.
Right.
And then he just kind of wasn't a main point anymore.
Yeah.
Because the riots just took over the city at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next time you come back to the defense segment, it says something to the effect of like you have humans fighting humans fighting Dredge, like basically just a chaotic mess.
Yeah.
Within the city, like
yeah,
outside of like maybe your little bubble.
Yeah, so a lot of the campaign in that segment was, and there was a lot of like walking around the walls and like deciding if you want to help people or spare resources, and I feel like a lot of that was just like how do you deal with all of these people and different races, and like how do you play this into the world scenario and when there's no real good way out of it.
Yep.
And I don't know if anyone has much more to say on that part. Oh, I guess you get a few in both the groups. You get one or two Dredge in your party finally.
Yeah, they're fun.
They were freaking amazing.
Yeah.
Kiwi and
Kiwi,
Castaway. Or is that right?
Yeah.
Castaway.
I have a list of the characters up. There were 4 possible, and I think I had all 4. I don't remember who was in which group. There was Kiwi, who was with the Ravens. There was also Castaway, Bastion, and Apostate.
I don't think I had Apostate.
Yeah, I think I used all 4 of those. They were all really good. Yeah,
all of them were good, but I remember relying on Kiwi especially because Kiwi was like a tank.
Yeah.
And was in the Raven group which is the group where you needed a tank.
Yeah, especially if Folka didn't make it.
If Folka Folka.
So that was where I was about to move away from all the Arbring stuff because I feel like we've covered a lot of that and kind of talk about the last parts of the game with the Ravens group. And one of those is how did Folka fare in both of your games?
Oh, poor Folka.
She was doing okay until she got an axe around her neck.
I had Folka live.
Yeah.
Did you do it by like pulling her away or talking her down, or how did you?
I pulled her away.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you get this climactic encounter with Bulwark, who's been pursuing the Raven group.
Yeah, so is he still... Here's one of my questions. My assumption is yes. Is he still Bellower possessed throughout this whole game?
I don't know whether he's Bellower or whether he's a minion of the Serpent or what. But
he's obviously not himself. He's like kind of possessed, but I never really knew by what.
Something definitely happens because Bellower actually comes and he didn't play much of a role, but he actually physically showed back up. So that was a bit confusing as well. But at the end of the second game, in my game, I remember there was a cutscene with the Serpent basically drizzling some sort of poison into Bulwark's mouth.
Yeah.
While he was passed out in the ruins of the tower.
Yeah. Because you get, because a lot of what that group's fighting in the darkness is corrupted beings of all the different races.
So they're all twisted and mangled and
so whatever the darkness has an ability to I don't know.
Yeah. And Bulwark
keep creatures for its own purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't physically get twisted either, even though he's kind of zipping through this darkness. So yeah, the Serpent theory is probably a good one. Because you definitely in that exchange, it gives you little hints that he might not be completely gone, but then he basically just I was like, well, if I lose Folka, I lose Folka, but So
I was basically
like,
like, Folka, you can't beat Bulwark because nobody can.
Yeah, I didn't expect her to beat him, but I was like, I'll probably lose Folka if I let her try to confront Bulwark, but if there's a chance that she could like turn him back and I could have him for the end, then that would be ideal.
Yeah.
So I let her try, and then she gets her head chopped off.
Is that how it happens? Is it straight up her head rolls?
No, I don't know if it's explicit about that, but he definitely buries his axe in her.
Yeah, she gives him his axe back and tells her to walk away, and she gets in his face and she's like, is this really how, like, you feel about me? And if you don't pull her away, he whips out his axe and puts it in. I think he like buries it in her collarbone.
Yeah,
her head doesn't roll, but she's dead.
Yeah,
she's like got an axe in her neck.
Brutal. I feel like like you can lose Rook, you can lose Folka, like you can Orlet. Like I feel like towards the end of Banner Saga 3, being the end of the trilogy, they really start leaning into like, okay, like we can have really hard hitting character swings and losses.
Yeah, and that the Folka dying happens right at the end of a chapter. And then right at the beginning of the following chapter is when Rook or Alette can die.
Yeah.
That was a hard...
That's a brutal,
That was a hard evening because I did those 2 chapters back to back.
Yeah, that's rough. But yeah, I mean, because you go through the first 2 games at least, and you're like, well, you lost Rook or Alette at the end of the first game, but like the other one's got to basically make it to the end or near it. Because they're kind of the main character, but once you get in the back half of Banner Saga 3, it starts feeling like all bets are off, like anyone can die.
And I really like how the Rook or Alette death isn't like the last scene in the game.
Right.
It can happen, I don't remember what chapter number it is, but it happens, and then more, like everybody else has to keep going.
Yeah.
And
so
they're
whose perspective are you playing at that point?
Odd takes over as the main character.
Okay.
And
so I just had Odd die instead.
Yeah, so like everybody's grieving about the loss of their like leader that they all had grown to love, and they like have a funeral for them in the middle of this burning city.
Right. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's just really well done overall.
Yeah.
But then we get the march to the White Tower in the darkness, right?
Yep. And I mean, basically the final boss of the game is Bulwark.
Yeah.
So you finally have your showdown with him, which I don't remember that actually being.
That fight was actually not hard at all for me.
Yeah, I don't remember that fight being that hard.
And the reason it wasn't hard is because they put a terrain element in there, these crystals that you can like shatter, and they shoot projectiles off if you hit them.
Yeah,
and it'll do damage to things, but they also block movement. And so like, for whatever reason, I guess the party I was using in that fight had a decent number of ranged attack characters. So I was just like shooting at Bulwark over and over, and he couldn't get to me because of all these dumb crystals in the way.
Hilarious. I remember just getting some. I think I got Ivor like right up because there was some. I got some kind of like. I think of the dialogue choices leading up to it, you could just bum rush him, and that like bought you an like extra turn or something.
Yeah.
And I think I just had Ivor get right in his face right at the start and just start wailing on him. And I had Avon like constantly using his armor repair on Ivor. And then I had some ranged characters and some other stuff. And I remember just like unloading on Bulwark, like. And killing him very quickly, and then you clean up the rest. But I remember just kind of bum rushing him.
I also don't know if this happened for you guys, but in that battle, for some reason, his health was or his strength was below maximum, and he starts out by like hitting 2 of the warp dredges around him and knocking them out of the way. And I think they might even have like a little bit of an armor retaliation. So he actually started out with only like maybe 14 or 16 strength and then like 18 armor or something like that.
Yeah, and was there a way he could like buff that up, and if you just killed him quickly enough, then it wasn't an issue, or I don't know.
I don't know if there was anything he could do about it, but one of Bulwark's weaknesses I feel like was armor breaking. And And so when they took away some of his starting strength, he could still kind of multi-hit, but it wasn't nearly as scary as when you have like a 20 strength Volvork just running around smashing dudes.
Yeah. But yeah, you finally beat Volvork, which I thought was kind of cool. Like him being the final fight of the game, I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, he's the only character that would have made sense as like a final boss.
I mean, I guess maybe if they had built up another Sunder that was really terrifying, that would be the other option. But I mean, Bellower really in the whole trilogy was, I feel like, the only Sunder they properly built up. Like there was another Sunder or two in part 3. There was the one that was throwing like the anchor.
Ruin, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But like they never really gave any other Sunders the same attention they did Bellower.
Yeah, Bellower. Did you ever fight Raze? Because Ruin, the reason Ruin was coming after you is... Oh, no, Raze was the one that Ivor had...
Ivor.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah.
But yeah, after that fight, you have the ending scene, which I feel like the entire final chapter was just dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Because you finally get where you want to go, and we already kind of touched on it when talking about part 2, but yeah, you learn a lot of that history with Juno and Ivan. And how all this began, and you make some choices on how it's going to end.
So, quick question. Speaking of Bellower, he does... I don't know if this affects anything, but Alfred goes out to kind of speak with him at one point. I don't know if you guys remember that. Like, the witch who's with you, she goes out and she's like... Because Bellower is telling you, and she's like, hey, I'm going to go confront him. And like it asks you, it's like, do you want to say anything? Like, do you want to send him a message basically from Ivor? I don't know. Do you guys remember that?
Vaguely, yeah.
In my game, like he just never showed up. Alfred just kind of comes back, and it sounded like maybe he was going off somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't know. There was a lot of like, I guess, kind of strange or very like minimal things happening around the edges, but I was on such like the gotta get to the end kind of pathway.
I wasn't sure if that was anything that could happen, like he could show up and throw a monkey wrench. I'm guessing maybe not. Like it's hard to imagine how that would make sense, but it sounded like actual Bellower was almost on top of you at one point.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, and then I guess that leads into your group climbs the tower. Juno has basically volunteered herself to be trapped in this power.
Mm-hmm.
The serpent shows up, and he's kind of desperate, and Avon has a decision to make, and you have a part to play in that.
Yeah,
and I've heard there are at least 3 ways that could play out, maybe more.
And kind of pressuring you during this is what you mentioned before, that he kind of has this madness to him.
Mm-hmm.
So like I don't know exactly how, because I just had my one way it went, so I don't know exactly all the deep how it can go, but it gave the impression that like if you don't talk him down, he'll just go crazy. And
it definitely seemed like he was maybe gonna try something more desperate than what he had been telling Ivor he was going to do, and then that was probably going to go really badly.
So
go ahead.
Sounds like maybe all of us had a similar outcome. Did you get basically him to do what Juno wanted him to do, which was basically put her in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's where I went. So the other options are, you could take the serpent's bargain, where it was basically like, hey, I'll only eat half the world, and we'll do halvesies and call it a day.
Yeah. That was pretty funny.
And then there was the choice that it sounds like we all did, where you actually convinced Avon to do what you came there to do. And then what was the other way it could go?
So, and I did want to just say, because you talked about the serpent's bargain, like the art for the serpent at that part is really cool. where he's like kind of starting to like almost rot.
Yeah.
Because he's sort of like half born. You've like taken all of his power or something like that. But anyway, I think there's an option, like Alfred the witch tries to convince you to let she has a bad history with the Valka.
Yeah.
And they basically tried to kill her because she had like talent that they couldn't manipulate or control or something like that. And so she doesn't trust Ivan or Juno and wants basically you to interfere with their ritual so she can step in and claim that power or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another option. So I guess there's Serpent's Bargain. There's tell Avon to listen to Juno. There's let Avon go crazy or trust him or whatever. And then there's try to do something with the witch.
And I guess we all got the same ending, but at that point it's like, all right, you kind of undo all this mess or stop the darkness from spreading and get rid of it. But I mean, the damage that's been done is already done. So you kind of come out of it like, all right, a lot of people are dead. A lot of the world has been destroyed. The darkness is receded and nothing else is going to be destroyed. And from what I remember, you just have like a simple exchange between like, I think Rook and Ivor met back up and they were just talking about like, yep, I guess we rebuild now.
Yeah. There's some line somebody says like, yeah, well, I guess people will just try to rebuild. And I'm like, really? Like, it's pretty bad. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know
like,
how
that was kind of it. There wasn't any like grand ending. It was just like, all right, that happened.
I think the final, either the final scene or close to it for probably me and Ryan is Rook or Alette going to the afterlife and meeting the other one who died at part one.
Yeah. And I guess his wife. In my
Rook's
case,
wife.
It was Rook, his wife and Alette.
Yeah, so in mine, Alette went to the afterlife with her parents.
Yeah, and mine was just like Rook looking at everything destroyed and just being like, I'm never getting out of this, am I? So it's like, in some ways, I feel like I got the quote unquote good ending. And then in another sense, I'm just like, man, Rook is just never going to have a good day.
Yeah, because now he's probably going to like be put into like the position of king or something and have to deal with everybody being terrible.
Yeah, because like I never got the sense that like it was just happily ever after because like there's still all of those conflicts between all of those groups that didn't even. So like that was kind of like my ultimate or one of the big takeaways from this entire trilogy is like it never had that like things just kept getting worse and it never had that moment of like that triumphant moment of like, all right, everyone puts aside their differences and rallies against the common threat and saves the day and we learn lessons from it and all this stuff. Like the very ending of the game was really much just like, all right, we stopped the quote unquote end of the world and everything still sucks.
It doesn't follow that very common trope of people putting aside their differences, like you said, which is kind of cool that they don't do that.
Like they really stuck. Like there's no like redemptive or like I don't know. There's no. Yeah, it's
like really at the end of the day, it was not people's like. It wasn't like, oh, everybody's actually good at heart and that's what saved the world. It was like a very small handful of people who were just bound and determined to reach a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the ones that made the difference. But the rest of everybody else was just getting in the way the whole time.
Yeah, and the ones in the group that made the difference, like they were the ones that lost the most. It's like they were the ones who sacrificed their happy. I mean, like Rook in my game, Rook lived, but he lost his daughter. He lost his lover and Odd. Like he, like the important people to him, he lost, and like he also probably feels like he made a bunch of bad decisions along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So like he didn't really come out of this good at all.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in my game, like I do agree that it wasn't necessarily like fairy tale book ending, but it did seem like, considering the circumstances, that was a relatively happy ending. Like, you know, Juno kind of makes something of a sacrifice, and Avon as well, which they needed to because they set the whole mess up. And then, you know, they had survived so much, like so many dire things, and like a lot of it, like you said, was just kind of out of grit and determination and not giving up and constantly looking for a solution. So at that point, they were kind of like, yeah, it's like we've lost a lot, I guess, but I guess we'll rebuild. You know, it wasn't exactly like a fairy tale ending, but, you know, you had some themes, like Ubin was like, well, you know, maybe I'll go see the Horseborn.
Yeah.
You know, I think there were some lands
when Ubin came in as a playable character, that was one of my favorite moments.
Yeah, that was good.
They did that really well, and they made it too.
Yeah. I do really appreciate how the game stuck. Like, we joked near the top of this about like how this game is just very dreary and depressing, and I appreciate how from start to finish through all three games, like they kept with that tone and stuck with painting a very grim, but I feel like realistic painting of this world.
Yeah.
Troubles, and like every time I thought, all right, things have got to turn up here, it just got worse.
Yeah, like, if it ends up feeling very honest, I think.
I think so, yeah. And I appreciate that because most games don't do that.
Yeah. Most games want to force a good, happy resolution when it seems like that doesn't really fit.
Yeah. So, I guess overall impressions of the third part are kind of for the series as a whole.
Yeah.
And I was very happy to take the journey and see what happened. I get the impression you both were as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good
story.
Yeah, we've kind of covered each, which took longer than I thought it might, but we covered a lot of ground. So we've kind of gone through each of the three games overview. I don't want to go too much longer here, but is there any other topics we want to bring up? I open the floor, whatever stuff you might want to discuss that we haven't covered across all three games.
I don't think I have anything big I want to talk about. I think like my closing feelings on it would be like, but when I got back into Banner Saga 3, I was happy that it was going to end the trilogy, and I was excited to see how it went, but I was also like surprised by when I started it and got a little bit into it. Like, I just really appreciate how unique the Banner Saga feels. Like, in terms of its artwork, in terms of its storytelling, the way the turn-based combat mechanics work, along with sort of the more meta mechanics that are more prevalent in 1 and 2. Like, I just think it's a very unique style of game, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It definitely carves its own identity for sure.
Yeah, like there's no other games that I can think of that feel like Banner Saga feels.
Yeah, maybe to a certain extent, like higher, but not quite the same. Like, not quite as ominous or as as realistic in some ways. The one thing I do want us to touch on quickly, closing out, is we've hit on the combat off and on, but I am curious, like maybe like final parties, or if there are any standouts. You know, you don't have to include the obvious choices like we talked about, Bulwark and Rook, necessarily, but I'm curious, like, if you guys have any thoughts or anything interesting about the heroes that you chose
I mostly ended up in the third game, which is more recent, so that's what I remember my most used characters. I mostly ended up using like lots of ranged characters, and
Did you use like the straight up archers?
Yeah, I used straight up archers a lot.
I can never get them to really work that well.
Was that like Ursa, Nid?
Oddleaf and Alette. Yeah, I used Oddleaf, Alette a lot. And then the Horseborn I really liked because they move really fast, and some of them have ranged attacks as well, and the poison effect is really good.
Yeah, the poison is really strong.
That one is funny because the Horseborn I didn't use a ton in the second game, and I used more of the melee hit and run ones, like Deirdre or Gath. I don't even remember. Scathach, I think, may have been the one.
I have the list of characters that were now Scathach and Deirdre, something like
that. I think Scathach was the melee one I used. But then, in the last game, because of like they split off some characters and you lose some characters, and then they give you some catch-up experience, I did use Canary.
Yeah, I like Canary a lot.
Canary was the one I was going to bring up. Like for the most part, I feel like I stuck to the standard characters. Like I relied on Rook a lot. Some of the stronger Varl. Towards the end of the game, I really relied on the dredge you get a lot.
I used them too.
But I would say like past the obvious choices, Canary was the one I used a lot. Like she was in some ways my star player because I don't know what it was. I guess just like she had really good strength and had good movement and good range because she was a ranged character. So I feel like I just wanted her in every battle. Like she was always going to perform well.
Yeah. I like those ranged characters, and especially ones that had a lot of movement. Canary was a strong one too.
Some of the Varl, I remember in 1 and 2 relying on a lot of the more aggressive Varl that had the Tempest move. And I feel in part 3, I got in a lot of trouble using them and felt like they just got targeted down real fast because their armor wasn't as high.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were like more strength, less armor, and like in the first half of the game, like they just kept dying, and eventually in the second half of the game, I'm like, I'm going to stop using them because they're just going down really fast.
Yeah,
that's
definitely
funny actually, because I remember really trying to keep Gunnulf, the guy, the green, the Varl who wears green and carries the great sword. I remember really trying to keep him alive through the first 2 games, but then, like you said, by the third game, which also partly he's competing with like Hakan and Boobin. And they're just kind of strictly better, but I also just felt like those guys weren't as worth it. But on the flip side, in the last game, I used Maugre.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Is that's the other part of this, which I think you're about to get into. Sorry to interrupt, but the more shield bearing Varl like Maugre, Fasolt, and those guys, I didn't use as much in 1 and 2, but used more in 3.
Yeah, Maugre was a star player for me in 3 and Krumer until you lose him, or at least I did towards the very, very end. I also used the archer, used Odd and Nid.
Did anyone use? I actually got a decent amount of use out of the like axe and shield humans that had the bloody flail ability.
Yeah,
they aren't bad. Yeah.
Most of them don't have great stats, but I think in the last game they give you Petrus. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they just give you a really strong one of those. And it felt like there always were a couple of viable ones to play into.
I know in part 2 I used spear guys a ton, but they were a little less viable in 3.
It is funny though, because in what was his name? In Ditch. He's not a great character. You're kind of forced to use him because you don't have a ton of.
In the third game in that Raven group, you don't always have a deep roster.
No,
but they kind of give him a little bit of more story in the third game, and he keeps getting you into trouble.
Yeah, he's kind of a doofus. I had a couple really good, like strong combat maneuvers with him using his stealth ability that he could like pop out and do a ton of damage to one guy. But yeah, he wasn't overall that great.
I don't know that I ever used him when I wasn't forced to.
Yeah.
Did anyone have much success with kind of the more oddball characters like the bard guy Spar
I did like Spar
or any of the mages really?
I had some success. The Menders, obviously, worst case, you could use Mend. And every now and then Arc Lightning was really strong. Juno took a lot of time to use. I didn't really like her, but she basically could live forever.
Yeah, I didn't use her much, and then I had a couple battles late in that final slog in Banner Saga 3 where I had a lot of injured people. And because she could kind of live forever, she actually dug me out of one or two tough battles.
Her mind control ability was pretty strong.
Yeah.
And then I did actually have a couple battles where the witch, I keep forgetting her name, the witch with the spear who could do ride the wind. Alfred, yeah. I like. She comes at a place where it's hard to invest much in her or get her items to support her, but that ride the lightning or whatever that attack was, there were some times where I set that up because I had, like you said, the roster wasn't that deep, and I would just position her and use ride the lightning. If you got it at max range, it actually would really put some hurt on the enemies, and then she was constantly regenerating her willpower. So you could also almost just have her run and pop that skill.
Yeah, I didn't really have much success with most of the spellcasting characters because I felt like I would just like run out of willpower too fast.
Yeah. There were a few like items that I got at least that seemed to be focused on helping out willpower consumption. But yeah, like that was always the trick with them. Avend I mostly just used as purely for his mend ability.
Yeah.
It's like whoever I had on the front being the tank just got mended every turn, which was often Kiwi late game. Because Kiwi was amazing.
Yeah. My basic strategy for most of the game was have one big tank character, whether it was one of the Dredge or a Varl, and then everybody else just like scatter around the field and just try to keep away and pelt with ranged attacks.
Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to discuss?
I think I'm good.
I think we've covered it.
All right. And I guess last call for final thoughts.
I think I pretty much shared mine. Did you have any?
It's similar to you. Yeah. Like I like turn-based games and tactical games like this. And I mentioned somewhere along the way, I like that this game had a different kind of take on that style of combat. But I think more importantly, what carried me through all three parts was, just like the art style and the tone of the story and like just the arcs the story took. Like it's a very unique game.
Yeah.
And the way you get involved, because it's not just battles that you interact with. It's like the way you get involved in managing the caravan in the first two parts, and of course making all the story choices. Like it's a very like this game is one that like really gets you to invest.
Yeah.
In a way that not a lot of games do, and especially not a lot of story driven games.
And I think we talked. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just wrapping up by saying it combines a lot of really interesting things, and even some. I won't say it always does it perfectly, but like it really got me to be engaged and think about what was going on, in a way that a lot of games don't. And I think it did, as we said earlier, like it has its own identity, and I think that's really cool. And you can tell that they had something they really wanted to make, and they were really passionate about it, and I'm glad they did make it because it's nothing else out there like it.
Yeah, and it's really cool that they were able to do the way they did it. Like they kickstarted all 3 parts.
They didn't kickstart part 2.
Oh, not part 2. Okay.
Yeah, so they kickstarted. There's actually a whole big thing there we won't get into, but they kickstarted part 1 and it did way better than they expected. So they didn't think they needed the money for part 2.
Gotcha.
And they felt like that actually hurt the game's development. So then they went back to Kickstarter for part 3. But
right.
Sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, and one thing to your point, which we talked a little bit about this on ATACS, but I think the game also does a good job of, like, even though, you know, we talk about all these crazy events and like this big epic story and kind of the desperation, like a lot of the moment to moment focuses on the characters. And there's a lot of good character dialogue, and that keeps even the third story, you know, you're basically trying to like put the sun back, you know, where the gods have died and there was some horrible prophecy and this evil snake thing. But it's like, you know, all that, you can piece all that together, but really like a lot of the focus is just on the characters and like how they're kind of trying to figure out a way to survive and do what they need to do. That kind of keeps things somewhat down to earth.
Yeah, I like that which we've touched on this stuff multiple times, but yeah, I like how it feels grounded in spite of everything going on, like you said. I like how they kind of are willing to not do the flip of like, all right, everyone bands together and here's our happy ending. And they stick to their guns on the tone of the game because that's what this world is, and they're not going to pretend it's any different. I think it's a really fascinating game. And it was a cool trilogy to play through.
Definitely.
All right, well, if nobody else has any final things to touch on, we're going to call that a spoiler cast.
I think that's a wrap.
Banner Saga trilogy done.
Spoiled.
So many spoiled games. Did spoiled 3 games at once here.
This is like a new record.
Thanks both of you for sitting down and talking about Banner Saga.
Yep.
I've been Flex, joined by Ryan and Nate on this special spoiler cast edition of ATACS. Let's talk about cool stuff. We're going to sign off. We will return at a later date with more episodes and spoiler casts and who knows what else. But thanks for listening to this one, and we'll see you next time.